What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Run Your Mouth podcast. It's the first live podcast of the new year. I hope that you don't actually have to work for a living and you can join us live. And it is a pleasure to be joined by Gene. You put up the biggest numbers of all my guests. You're the number one guest on the Run Your Mouth podcast, and it is a pleasure to have you back on. First guest of the new year. Thanks for being here.
I'm honored, Rob, to be the first one to run my mouth on Run Your Mouth in 2022. And I do want to tell your listeners that this could be the most important podcast that they listen to in 2022. I'll be explaining why shortly, but I do want to take the opportunity to say to your many tens of thousands of listeners who are presumably well-heeled that the Soul Forum invited Rob Bernstein himself, to be the warm-up act at our February 17th debate, which is going to be extremely well attended because it has Jonathan Haidt debating Robbie Suave on the issue of social media, on what government should do or not do about social media. Jonathan Haidt and Robbie Suave are both big draws, and so we expect a pretty large crowd. Now, so I invited Rob Bernstein to be the warm-up act for that large crowd in Lower Manhattan, and Rob told me to stick it up my ass. And not in so many words. Now, why did he? Because
I wish I was that cool, Gene. I'm a little bit more respectful. I wish I was that good of a negotiator, and I just said, up yours. I'm not doing it.
Okay, then I would have upped the pay. It was going to be a paying gig on top of everything else. And Rob could always use a little shit coin.
That is true.
Yeah. But Rob is a principled guy. And because the venue, of course, in Manhattan demands proof that you've been vaxxed, Rob said, no way, I'm not doing it. And I had to respect Rob's decision. So that's to my great regret, Rob is not doing it. And that segues, however, into our recent fundraising campaign. I released a fundraising statement, and we raised a pretty tidy sum of money, but could use more. What we're trying to do with the extra money that we badly need is try to some degree to accommodate principled people like Rob, who say, as long as you succumb to those vax mandates in Manhattan, the Soul Forum is just not the venue I attend. So one of the things I did, the big thing I did in December, is that I held a simulcast in my huge loft apartment with a 123-inch screen where we showed the debate that was only 2 blocks away. And in my apartment, my loft apartment, which has a capacity of about 60, could easily be seated, a couple of standing. There are no vax requirements, no masks, no nothing.
That's where the real party is. I'll just stand up for that crowd. I'll do the home crowd. I'll warm them up.
All right. Okay, Rob. There's no pay for that gig, though.
That's all right. It's Manhattan Summer Porch Tour. I'm a man of the people, and if people are showing up to a living room, they feel like they couldn't attend the big show with the big names. I'll be there with the little man. Does your wife still put out the delicious meatballs and cookies?
Yes, indeed. No, the food. See, that's where the food is. And then what happens is what happened in December. What will happen again in February is that then the people at the Sheen Center, 2 blocks away, will be invited over to my loft apartment for the after party for the debate. That would be around 8:00. And we did it in December. And I have to say that people like Rob, the people who refuse to get vaxxed, they seem to be my kind of people.
Yeah, they're the funner people. They're the smarter people. They understand the risks and benefits of, having their freedom and not being forced to take experimental vaccines. And those are the people to hang out with.
Yeah. Well, you proved right, Rob, because I haven't had such a good time in one of my receptions in quite a long time. And so we're doing it again in February. But however, what actually happened in December is my wife, who had one inept assistant, she was just overwhelmed by all the people who were buzzing because I was over at the Sheen Center, as were my main assistants. So she had to get let people buzz in. She just went slightly crazy. So we've got to staff up for that event. She needs support. She needs people to usher people in, to buzz them in. We've got the neighbors to worry about. I don't want to get thrown out of the co-op for inviting all those retrograde people like Rob Bernstein over to my apartment. So I've got to make sure that people mind their manners. Just walk up the stairs, one flight up. Just don't take the elevator. Just walk the one flight up. We're on the second floor of the loft building. And then on top of that,
Gene, I'm going to be knocking on the doors of your neighbors to let them know that there's illegal gatherings going on inside the building right. And that you're not respecting the COVID protocols.
Yeah. Rob is going to rat on me. So indeed, look, he'll have a right to rat on me because indeed I'm not. But anyway, but look, I have a right not to respect the Rob, I'll tell you the law in my own apartment. Happily, not look, the totalitarian state has not yet taken over my domicile, Rob. As you know, this is only in public venues. I have the right to invite the scum of the earth, people like Rob Bernstein, over to my apartment. That's my privilege. That's my right of association, Rob. You know that. So there's nothing illegal about what I'm doing. On the other hand, of course, the co-op could toss me out, which of course could create problems for me, but you obviously going to cooperate. Yeah.
I'm so honored that me being an invite is your expression of freedom.
Okay, so that's the point. I'm trying to earn my spurs with all those people who've sort of, ranked me out for the fact that I've succumbed to the mandates. I pled with people. I've said, look, I don't want to go back to doing Zoom debates. That's just no fun. And I want the crowd. I want the party. That's what I want, the theatricality of two people debating in front of the crowd. Yeah.
To stand in your defense, there's an audience of New York intellectuals that are probably very into the vaccines. Yeah. And I think the SOA Forum is changing minds and bringing those people good information. Yeah. So, the only way you're going to get them in the doors is if it's a venue that they're comfortable with, and that's what they want. And so, firstly, we're free market people. Those are people that want a specific venue with a specific standard, and they're willing to get a ticket for it. So, there's a market for it. And the only way you're going to reach those people is by catering to it. So I support it.
Well, yeah, Rob, technically, isn't it? When I saw you at the Brooklyn Comedy Club Cellar, they had a sort of vax mandate there too, didn't they have to comply? I mean, right?
As far as I know it, that I don't want to rat out that venue, but in my experience with them, they've been very cool. And it's been a little bit of it's like the old military gay thing. Don't ask, don't tell.
Well, actually, that's part of it as well, by the way. The vax mandates are sort of not being enforced that severely, but that's a different matter. You and I don't want to talk illegality too much on a podcast because this could be, the government might come down on us. But anyway, I just want to cut to the chase and say that apart from that as well, I need the money to take our show on the road a bit more. I haven't had quite the energy to do it quite as much as we did last year. We went to Florida twice. We went to New Hampshire. We went to South Dakota.
You gonna get a tour bus? The Gene Epstein tour bus?
Well, yeah, well, again, and that's right. I need money for the tour bus. I need money for the staffing. We have to pay people to do a video. So this was a plea for funds. And I said to people, look, if you're criticizing me for succumbing to the vax mandates by having live debates in Manhattan, then put your money where your mouth is and contribute so that I can afford to take the show on the road and to continue to do those alternative, the simulcasts in my apartment, because that requires additional staffing. And I don't take a salary from the SOA Forum. It's a labor of love purely, and I just didn't love doing the Zoom debates. I love having the parties. So it was a plea for funds. Put your money where your mouth is. Go into thesoulforum.org, first of all, to buy tickets for, I guess, look, Rob just volunteered to do a stand-up, so I guess we'll post them. If you go to then the...
I better check the date on that, but I'm down for it. I can't imagine I already have a February conflict. If it's open, I'm down.
17th. Thursday, February 17th, Rob. Look, come on, you're booked everywhere. You're watching.
I wish I was that busy. I wish, Gene, I was so cool that I was telling you to shove gigs up your ass, and that I was so busy that even on a Thursday in February, you couldn't possibly get me. But
you could say, look, shove a non-paying gig up your ass. What you want me to say?
You think it's not paying? Just wait till I eat all those cookies. You're going to turn around and be like, wow, Rob really ate his pay.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, Rob, I guess we'll give you a few minutes because I don't know. I'm trying to think about the time. Yeah, we'll deal with it. We'll deal with it. Anyway, about your comment. You've got a comment. But anyway, what we have now, if you go into thesoulform.org, first of all, if you hit the donate button, then you could put your money where your mouth is and help us to do all the things that I've just mentioned. Secondly, we are selling seasons tickets. We have 3 debates up for sale at a discount, and you can choose to buy. You got to pay at the door. Rob could come in for free because he's going to do his. Oh no, yeah, we are paying you a little bit, Rob, because we won't charge you at the door.
That's sweet.
We will have to charge people at the door for the simulcast. For the staffing, but that won't cover our costs. So that's just a contribution. But you can buy a season's ticket to the simulcast. You can buy a season ticket to the event itself at the Sheen Center. 3 debates coming up. And on top of that, you can donate. thesoulform.org. Go into that website. And now I guess we'll get down to business, Rob.
Well, as long as we're plugging, I do have 2 dates, no vax needed, up in Boston with Dave 13th, 14th, and then up in Buffalo on the 21st.
Oh.
And now, Gene, I was honored that you attended my end of year misinformation spectacular live.
Yeah.
One of the topics that I was, I did my homework on it, but I was most concerned as I was definitely exploring some economic literature that I wasn't getting everything right was my take on global warming.
Yeah.
Now, in putting that together, I think there's a 2-sided argument kind of against government intervention in global warming. One of them is the moral case for fossil fuels, which was kind of the way I approached it. Yeah. And then there's also how much evidence is there really of basically man's actions contributing to climate change. And that kind of digs into models. And for whatever reason, I kind of had a joke in last year's end of year thing about economic, faulty models. So I didn't really dig into that side of the argument. But I understood, I had the thought in my head of man, I'm trying to be comprehensive here. And I know I'm overlooking a big part of it. And then you and I got on a call afterwards and you were giving me some really interesting information about kind of the way those models work. So I'd love to hand it back to you if you could educate the listeners a little bit, specifically on your take on, I guess, just how much man is contributing to global warming or a changing climate. They even kind of change their terms around at times.
Oh yeah, no, this climate change business. I mean, they should call it global warming. They claim that the Earth is warming, and that man is very importantly contributing to it. To give you a full answer, Rob, which I guess won't take too long, I'm basing this on a book I've read called Unsettled: What Climate Science Tells Us, What It Doesn't, and Why It Matters.
That's a dense book. I listened to pieces of it. It's very dense.
All right. Okay. Well, then you've got Professor Epstein to.
Good, because it was over my head. So this is going to be great.
All right. So yeah, I'll give you the punchline. As a matter of fact, I'm having Stephen Koonin come to the Soul Forum in March. And of course, he should give the dumbed down version. You'll, of course, come to the simulcast in March to listen to him. And I'm going to coach Stephen Koonin to dumb it down for people like Rob Bernstein. But anyway, I'm going to give you the dumbed down version. Now,
if you want to run the dumb test against me beforehand to see what I can comprehend, I'll happily participate.
Okay. All right. Let me set the stage this way, Rob, because you allow me to be expansive on your podcast. Stephen Koonin was an appointee under President Obama. He says he's a capital D Democrat, so he's an Obama supporter, a capital D Democrat. And why do I mention that? Only because he clearly must be regarded by the capital D Democrats and by the Obamaites as a bit of a renegade, but he's kept his integrity. And so he's in no way, hopefully a lot of capital D Democrats are listening to this podcast, and I've tweeted a number of his insights for the sake of the capital D Democrat. This is a guy you can trust, you progressives out there, because his political sympathies lie with you. But because he's a scientist, he's honor bound to speak the truth about what's really going on. Okay, now what's really going on is a little bit different from the way you formulated it, Rob, but still it comes out the same way. What's really going on is that 98 to 99% of the reason why the Earth is warming is due to natural causes. And he explains that something called albedo, all the things that we can sort of look at scientifically. And I won't bore the listeners with that. I probably can't do a very good rendition of it. So his punchline, because he's a rock rib scientist who's done model building, who is basically a very well-educated climate scientist, it's due to natural causes. But let me tell you why we know superficially that it's due to natural causes. That's because the warming started before the 20th century even began. The Earth is warmed by about 1.4 to 1.8 Fahrenheit. I'm looking at the number, but it's in that range. And it started to warm around 1880, 1890. And on top of that, one of the strongest warming trends occurred from 1910 to 1940. Now, you probably immediately know why I'm emphasizing that fact, because it's a strong clue that he must be right about natural causes, because nobody talks about human influences until about mid-20th century. That's when human influences having to do with methane and carbon dioxide heated up. And here we have a warming trend from 1910 to 1940 that was about as strong as the recent warming trends. So that should indicate to you that natural forces must be in the saddle just on that basis alone. Again, I repeat, because the Earth started to warm, according to the numbers we have, prior to the 20th century. And 1910 to 1940 was about as strong as what we've recently seen. And on top of that, the 25-year period beginning around 1990, there was a period in which the warming period slowed, 16 years in which it slowed. And that was a time when carbon dioxide was building up. In other words, we've had a slowing over a recent period, and carbon dioxide and man-made influences were building up. So I know. So that's another clue that natural forces must be in the saddle, that we are affecting it at around a 1.1 to 2% margin, but that 98% is the principal reason why the Earth is warming. Do you have a question of that before I proceed?
No, yes, I guess I do have a question. It sounds to me that we're saying that we can't really correlate man-made carbon with cooling or heating, because we've seen both of those incidents outside. Like we've seen when we're using a lot of carbon that the world was actually not getting hotter, and we've also seen that it's gotten hotter when before. Yeah. So how do you correlate exactly that 2% of what's going on even has anything to do with human carbon? It just sounds to me like it's kind of removed from what we're doing altogether.
Okay. Well, all right. But with then the answer to your question is, with that said, Koonin, who is a strictly honest scientist, says that we know based upon science, we know a priori that carbon dioxide and methane, which is human influences, do have a warming effect. They do have some effect in locking heat into the Earth. So therefore, he actually has a nice homely analogy. He says that suppose you eat an extra cucumber every day, that you have a certain diet, and then you eat an extra cucumber every day. And then the second year you eat an extra 2 cucumbers and maybe an extra 2.5 cucumbers. We know that the extra cucumbers you're eating, which have very few calories, but if you're eating them every day, then they are clearly calorically contributing to the potential for your weight gain. But then we also know that 98%.
If you're eating Twinkies in the afternoon, that cucumber's not making much of a difference.
Precisely.
Right. Okay. So it's technical. It's like, yes, it makes a difference. You're eating one too many cucumbers, but against the Twinkies that you're eating, it's kind of irrelevant. So it's technical. So it's the same thing here. It's like the carbon that we're emitting. Yes, technically it does something, but compared to what the Earth does, it's kind of irrelevant. If you can fix the Earth first, then you can start worrying about our carbon. And even as it is, it sounds like it's cyclical. So it's probably not it's either not much to be concerned about, or it's not so much that we need to stop our carbon, but we need to be inventing technologies so that we can kind of offset what the Earth is going to naturally do.
Okay, just a moment, Robbie. Okay, I like the way you like to repeat that. This is the Rob Bernstein way that I really like. You try to read back to me what what I've said, and then I can correct it a little bit. I can say, again, as usual, Rob, you're about 90% right and about 10% full of shit in what you just said.
So I'm just like global warming. I'm basically, I correlate perfectly with the percentage that carbon's actually making a difference.
With respect to that, the Twinkie versus the cucumber thing, I also want to say that, because I'm a big aficionado about weight gain and weight loss, is that it's not just the Twinkies, but obviously, for example, by analogy, how much you exercise, how many carbs you eat, because carbs affect the way the calories are processed. So there's so much else, as he likes to point out, that determines your weight gain, your weight loss. So we now have to create a model, however, for the cucumber effect. This gets to your question about models, Rob. Don't you remember? You asked a question about the models.
Yes.
So the point is, this sets the stage for the fact that if man's influence, the cucumber effect, is really like having a 1 to 2% effect at the margin, then you have the daunting challenge of constructing a model that can figure out all of the natural influences and then tease out the man-made influences and see how they affect global warming. And so that in itself should tell you that it's almost an impossible task, because there's so many complex factors affecting the climate. We don't understand them all completely in terms of empiricism. And the punchline is, as he puts it, because he knows model building through and through, the punchline is that the models are gibberish. They use a blend of about like 40 models. The models differ by something like 5 degrees Fahrenheit in terms of the results. The models differ by more than the amount of global warming over the last century. That in itself should tell you that they're going in all crazy different directions. So there's a kind of a fraud at the root of this, which is that we're constantly hearing about the models. The UN is constantly publishing the results of the models, but really all it does is sort of average the results of the models. And what happens on top of everything else is that the model builders actually tweak their models. If they don't like the results, they tweak them, they change them. So there's just no science involved at all in this model building. But again, if you back up about it, you can realize that if I just took you, Rob, and I tried to build a model about how much the cucumber effect is influencing your weight gain or loss, then we'd probably recognize that there's so many imponderables. Like, for example, as I said, how much your carbohydrate intake, the exercise, all of the other factors which we don't fully understand. We probably could not figure out the influence of the cucumber effect, even in Rob Bernstein, and even though we know something about weight gain. And that's why he says the models are gibberish. Now, but there's more to the story than that. But you have something else to say?
Yeah, so I do have a question on that, and this question, there's a dumb assumption in this question, but I'm going to ask it anyways.
Okay, sure, Rob. I'm glad you're denigrating yourself before I go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So they like to preach to us that, all of science is in agreement about this man-made climate change. And now even that, right, is it that they're all in agreement of man-made climate change or climate change? They do kind of like mix those two things together. But when it comes, all right, I guess what I'm going to ask is it that scientists, for some unknown reason, seem to think that there is man-made climate change, or they don't like the pollution, so they're willing to kind of lie and say, yes, we do have this climate change, and so they're a little bit too aggressive with their models because they're being salespeople, right? Yeah. So for whatever reason, they're kind of anti-pollution. They feel that they have a good agenda here, and they're lying? Or is it that there's actually very few scientists who are looking at these models and real, like most scientists would look at this and go, hey guys, the data is not that clear here. You're moshing together models that are making assumptions and we don't have clear evidence of this. Yeah. Like, do most scientists kind of acknowledge, hey, this isn't that, like, it's not proven to a T? Or do most of them kind of realize, like, it's for some other reason that they're just trying to sell us on this?
Yeah. Well, no, of course, that's a good question. I know what's the dumb part of that? There's nothing dumb at the core of that, Rob. You're asking, well, why are they selling? If these models are gibberish, why are they being?
Well, I guess the stupidity is if they're going to point to the models as being the evidence, and it's so clear cut that the evidence doesn't stand. So then, why is it that they're concluding global warming? Like, is what is the reason for it?
Rob, just a moment. I'm sorry, the way you formulated that question, again, for the sake of the listeners, I must emphasize that the Earth is warming. And as Kunin says, that the trends seem to be in place for the Earth to continue to warm, mainly overwhelmingly because of natural causes, for reasons that we just established. And man is contributing to it, but it's such a small contribution at the margin that you
got to shut down the Earth first. Before you shut down the economy and gas and pipelines, you got to shut down the Earth. Can I ask one quick question, though?
I'm sorry. I didn't get. Okay, go ahead, Rob. You're impressible. What do you think?
According to Kunin, is the level of change something that we're at risk for? So, like, even if you do establish that it's not man-made, is it something to be concerned about?
The answer basically is potentially yes. Potentially, yes, but that does indeed set the stage for the next part of the analysis. But I just want to back and fill one point, which is to say that because the models are gibberish, because we really don't know to what extent that cucumber, to get back to our analogy with this diet, is making a difference. We really don't know what will happen if Rob Bernstein starts to eat a half a cucumber. Let's say Rob Bernstein has a craving for cucumbers and he's going to have a nervous breakdown if he doesn't eat a full cucumber every day and maybe an extra cucumber next year. And so the point is that since we really don't know the extent to which that cucumber is really affecting his weight and making him chubbier, then there's really no scientific basis for saying how much we're going to affect the outcome by cutting down on Rob's consumption of cucumbers. And then, of course, by analogy, we really don't know how much we could affect the outcome by cutting back on the use of fossil fuels because it's so marginal and we don't have the models to figure it out. So that's the key point. But you have some, because I want to get to the next question.
No, I've also heard that the, I guess, marginal destructive power of man-made carbon decreases in higher volumes. Meaning that even if it's true that 2% of climate change is the result of man-made carbon emissions, let's say we were to double the amount of carbon that we emitted tomorrow, it wouldn't be doubly destructive because the actual marginal destructive quality of carbon kind of reduces at higher emissions.
Yes. Well, actually, that is quite right. That is quite correct. However, this is something I knew even before I read Kunin. But then, of course, I'm told by those who respect the models, who are deluded enough into respecting the models, the models take that into account. It isn't as though the model builders don't know that. They give you that bullshit. And then in addition, the other part of it, Rob, is that carbon dioxide, once it's put into the atmosphere, has a very long life. It stays in the atmosphere for a very, very long time. And so therefore, the point about the fact that doubling doesn't have a doubling effect on global warming is offset by the fact that it builds up. So all of that is fine to say and not irrelevant. But the key point is that, again, 98% of the story is natural source of forces. It has to do with the ability of the Earth to send heat back. When you found his discussion a bit daunting, Kunin's discussion, that is, he was trying to explain all these natural forces and how they work. And again, I hope I've established, for the sake of the lay people, that we have overwhelming clues that natural forces must be in the saddle. Again, because the buildup of carbon dioxide over a 16-year period from about 1998 to 2014 went up by 25%, and yet the cooling, the warming trend slowed. It slowed, so that should be a clue in and of itself that at the margin we're not that important. And again, I should go back to one point about the models, which Kunin makes, is that the models can't explain why the warming trend was so rapid from 1910 to 1940, why it slowed from 1940 to 1960. They can't even explain precisely what went on, even when natural forces were in the saddle. So again, the models are gibberish, and that's the key point to bear in mind, and not your talking point so much about how the carbon dioxide has less of an effect as it doubles. because again, it builds up, and that's the other part of it. By the way, there is, I guess, another part to make, which is that that even if we slow the amount of carbon dioxide we put in the atmosphere, it is building up. It does accumulate, and it's going to take many decades before it starts to decline. But all of that, in a way, is irrelevant. We just don't know to what extent we're making a difference. And now, of course, we want to bring in. I want to answer your question about why global warming may still be a concern, because and also, of course, now bring in what you said earlier having to do with the moral case for fossil fuels, which is Alex Epstein's point. That's the title of Alex Epstein's book. And it's a point that Kunin doesn't emphasize as much as he might, which is, of course, as you've indicated, Rob, that fossil fuels are life. We have no alternative to run the world except through fossil fuels, potentially through nuclear energy, by the way. But nuclear energy is going to take decades to develop. Ultimately, I think nuclear energy probably will be the basis of our use of energy. But fossil fuels are dominant now. And the one key bit of data that I want to cite having to do with the moral case for fossil fuels is indoor air pollution caused by the burning of solid fuel sources such as firewood, crop waste, and dung for cooking and heating. One source estimates that it's responsible for 1.6 million deaths each year, and the World Health Organization puts the deaths at 4.3 million a year. The poor people of the world do not have any other way of heating their homes other than through the use of firewood, crop waste, and dung, and that is killing them in the millions. They need fossil fuels to survive. And that's the primary cause of, I think, source of the reason why we have to make a moral case for fossil fuels. As Alex Epstein does correctly put it, the environmental lunatics say, hey, look, okay, so what difference does it make if the models are gibberish? We'll cut down on the use of fossil fuels. Wouldn't that be a good thing after all? That's what the environmentalists say. Well, this winter season, more people are going to die of the cold because they can't afford to heat their homes because the price of energy has soared. And that's because of the policies of the environmentalists. So they are immorally killing people by denying the poor people of the world fossil fuels. And so you're not. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the author, I haven't read Epstein's book. I should check that out. I read, I don't remember the.
He pronounces it Epstein. Watch it. I pronounce it Epstein. He pronounces it Epstein. Go ahead.
Epstein. But I read, I have no idea how to pronounce this last name. It's and he's in the Wall Street Journal all the time. It's BJORG, Bjorg, I think maybe is the name.
Bjorn Lomborg.
Yeah, that guy's great. So.
Yeah.
But he points out that on an annual basis, significantly more people die of cold than any other like natural disaster or heat-related incident.
In this case, actually, I guess Kunin makes another point which is rather stunning. Maybe we're overwhelming people with insights. He makes the point, and this does surprise me, that global warming is primarily being manifested in warmer winters. Almost overwhelmingly, it's warmer winters rather than hotter summers. And he points out the dishonesty of the way the numbers have been presented, which confuses people on this point. So indeed, as you indicate, it's life-saving. But yeah, no, come to think of it, Rob, I now have to go back to your earlier question. You would ask, why are the scientists lying to us? And that's a dumb, naive question, Rob, because, of course, the answer to that question is that they just can't survive unless they please the powers that be. The amazing thing is that the global warming lunatics seem to be in the saddle. It's difficult to survive. Kunin has come up against a lot of attacks, a lot of criticism. He's a very calm and cool guy. He doesn't seem to mind all the character assassination he gets, all the hostility, and even he's a renegade from being a Democrat. It seems to take courage to speak the truth about these matters. The money that the UN disperses, the money the government disperses, it's all in the service of this myth that global warming is a threat and that we have to do something about it. Now, it's difficult for progressives to believe that. You'd think that, well, the oil and gas industry must have some clout. Why are they succumbing? In a way, it's hard to know. But and Kunin doesn't say that he knows how to read people's minds. He just knows that the pressure is very intense for scientists to pretend to know that human causes are very important, and that we can figure them out, and that if we cut down on fossil fuels, we can do something about it. And by the way, you mentioned Bjorn Lomborg. The only way, and Bjorn Lomborg, by the way, endorsed Kunin's book. And Kunin has a very positive thing to say about Lomborg. But Lomborg basically succumbs to the myth that the models have a certain precision. He succumbs to the myth that we have some knowledge about how we can slow global warming by cutting back on the use of carbon. So that's where Bjorn Lomborg goes wrong, and where Kunin has a crucial contribution to make. We simply don't know. And again, where Kunin, I think, is mistaken, and where the moral case for fossil fuels applies, is that it's not an open proposition. It's not a neutral proposition. The cutting back on the use of fossil fuels. Bjorn Lomborg makes this point along with Alex Epstein and others. It's killing people. The poor people of the world need fossil fuels. Our message to the poor people of the world is fossil fuels for me, but not for thee. And anybody who says that, in effect, and people who fly around the world, Leonardo DiCaprio, who once said, I want to fly around the world, spreading the message about global warming, well, he's going to leave an enormous carbon footprint if he flies around the world, because flying does indeed, spread a lot of carbon around the world. And when you do that, and so again, those people are immoral. If they had any awareness, those progressives, they are killing people. There are people who are going to die this winter because of a lack of the ability to afford the soaring price of fossil fuels. So that's why there's a moral imperative to recognize that if we can't figure it out, then we should develop fossil fuels, as Alex Epstein says. But then the last part of your question was, but is global warming still a question? Is it still something to worry about? In other words, you would say, well, whether it's natural causes or human causes, if the Earth is warming and if it's a source of concern, maybe we should do something about it anyway, right? Doing something about it by cutting back on the use of fossil fuels, that's not a good idea for the reasons that we've just said, because we don't know how much we're contributing to it, and we're going to kill people if we do cut back on the use of fossil fuels. But maybe we have to cope with the natural causes. And the answer, I guess, when you said, is it a source of concern? I shouldn't have said yes. I should have said the answer is maybe. Maybe it's a source of concern. Now, Kunin's best guess is that given the trends of the past century or more, another 1.4 degrees of global warming or sea level rise or anything of that sort is easily dealt with through adaptation. If sea levels rise above a certain level, in Manhattan, we'll build seawalls, we'll build dikes. Adaptation is very open to us. If a poor country has problems and can't afford to build dikes, then certainly, hopefully, the richer countries of the world might subsidize it through charity.
And it would still be cheaper for us to subsidize building some dikes for a poor country versus not burning the fuel and not growing economically.
That's right, and as Bjorn Lomborg puts a finer point on it as well. If you allow that country to grow through the use of fossil fuels, then it will probably be able to afford its own dikes. And again, of course, when you say cheaper, yeah, it's pennies on the dollar. It's a trivial sums of money compared to the amount of money, the trillions that we're spending by killing people through cutting back on fossil fuels. Because again, I guess we have to belabor the fact that those so-called renewable energies, the sun and the wind sometimes doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine at night, and it's clearly no alternative for the poor peoples of the world. Fossil fuels are the only alternative. So therefore, we will probably deal with it through natural forces of adaptation. If global warming does become a problem, and then he even trots out, because he's a scientist, other forms of mitigation. we know that if we could have meteors. There are lots of other risks to the world, lots of other things that could end the world or could kill millions of people, lots of other potentials for natural disasters. One of them is falling meteorites. I could list a few others. Of course, another one is nuclear war, which we want to guard against. But in any case, we have risks. But in the case of global warming getting to such a point where we have to deal with it on a global basis, we have on the shelf, and we know about ways of slowing those natural influences. And as Kunin puts it, they should be explored. They could be done, by the way, through private philanthropy because they're not that expensive. Ways of increasing the Earth's ability to send heat back into the atmosphere. So we have that on the shelf as well. And I wouldn't like to see that, but as Kunin says, adaptation and mitigation are clearly two ways we can deal with global warming, and certainly coming back on fossil fuels is the dumbest, most disastrous, and most harmful way imaginable, given the reasons that we've stated. So hopefully that sews it up. But you have some other questions.
No, I think there's also, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think there's even a two-step process where you have faulty models, and then not only do you have the faulty models, but then they jump to conclusions off the models that aren't even consistent with the models. And I think the purest example of that was actually, I'm sure I'm going to have this wrong. Bob Murphy emailed me maybe 2 years ago, and I read through it. I had it crisp at the time, but this is 2 years ago. But he was saying that there was a discrepancy between I think it might be the same guy. So the Obama appointee who won a Nobel Peace Prize for his work in global warming, and then against the UN recommendations that essentially that guy was coming to I think you needed to reduce it by 1 or 2% a year or something, and then the UN jumped to 7, which didn't even make sense. Maybe you can offer a little more of the actual insight into that.
No, I know what you're talking about there, Rob. I was going to mention that, but as well. The guy you have in mind is William Nordhaus. William Nordhaus is an economist who won Nobel Prize for writing a book about cutting back on fossil fuels, cutting back on carbon, the use of carbon through taxes, and the key point that Bjorn Lomborg liked about his conclusion, and that Bob Murphy liked about his conclusion, is that based upon our knowledge, we should cut back on it some. But if we cut back on it more than just some, then the costs are going to exceed the benefits. And so his was supposedly a very well formulated idea that only a certain amount of carbon should be cut back on, rather than a great deal of carbon. So in that sense, he was a sort of a thumb in the eye of the environmentalists who think we should cut back on all use of fossil fuels, or 80% of our contributions in terms of carbon, because Nordhaus was saying that if you cut back on it too much, then all the benefits of fossil fuels, many of the benefits of fossil fuels, are lost. So his was a kind of a standard cost-benefit analysis based on the models. And when I spoke to Kunin, when I spoke to Kunin looked a little embarrassed when I asked him about Nordhaus. He doesn't mention Nordhaus in his book because unfortunately he's basically saying that even Nordhaus is pushing bullshit. You understand that? In other words, again, to set the stage again, Bob Murphy said Nordhaus, the very time when the UN was publishing its results, the IPCC was publishing its findings, Nordhaus wins a Nobel Prize, and Nordhaus was basically saying, you're correct. Nordhaus was basically saying, no, you just want to cut back on it somewhat based upon my cost-benefit analysis, which in turn is based on the models. And Bob Murphy was correct, as was Bjorn Lomborg, that Nordhaus is a moderate and a much more intelligent moderate than the UN was, because Nordhaus was pointing out that there is a downside to cutting back on fossil fuels. But then the truth of the matter is that Nordhaus's whole Nobel Prize is based on gibberish. The
Right.
reason it's based on gibberish is it's based on those models, and the models differ by 5 degrees. I don't know precisely what model he was using, but they averaged like a blend of 40 models. Again, we're going back to why they're gibberish. The fact is, again, they differ by the models themselves differ by 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and global warming has only been 1.4 degrees. That in itself should indicate that they go in every direction. And then on top of that, as I said, the models have been unable to figure out what happened from 1910 to 1940. So that's where I was. I thought it was just a little funny that Kunin didn't want to embarrass Nordhaus. He didn't mention Nordhaus in his book. But when I put the question to him, he admitted to me that Nordhaus is unfortunately pushing bullshit.
There you go. Fair enough.
It's interesting because Nordhaus is probably well-intentioned, but you see where you're sort of trained in model building and you sort of want to associate yourself with that crowd. So you use the models and you say, Bjorn Lundberg likes to say, well, look, the models are a little imperfect, but they're all that we've got, they're all that we've got. Well, look, if the models are bullshit, then having bullshit is not exactly a great thing to have. But apart from that, as I say, I do want to repeat the point, maybe to the point of belaboring the point. This is not a neutral issue, and that's where Kunin goes wrong a little bit. It's not a neutral issue to say that we might as well cut back on fossil fuels anyway, because after all, isn't that a good idea from an environmental standpoint? That's the reason why there's a very heavy moral burden of proof on anybody who would say we want to cut back on fossil fuels, because you're going to be killing people in the short run, presumably because you're claiming you'll save more lives in the long run. And the truth of the matter is that you have no basis for being able to make that claim that you'll save more lives in the long run, because the models are gibberish and natural forces are in the saddle.
All
and
right,
mitigation and adaptation are the real solutions if we face problems of global warming going down in the century to come.
All right. So last 2 questions on global warming, then we're going to move on to our next topic, which is your book.
This is an intellectual club sandwich, Rob. We do global warming, and then we're doing the mayonnaise, applying the mayonnaise to the sandwich. What, Rob? What do you want to say?
Okay. So you were pointing out that the lefty mind is somewhat like they understand that the information is manipulated by companies, but they kind of get the story wrong, that they look at it and they say, hey, the gas companies and all of the companies that are invested in kind of burning carbon are preventing us from the truth, which is global warming. Sure. Now, the reality is you've got the lobby of BlackRock and I would just say more socialist players that are actually the bigger group that are pushing this global warming story.
A Jewish guy named Fink. Yeah, he's got a good name. The guy who runs BlackRock.
Larry Fink, yeah.
Fink.
I saw some crazy stat. I think that they're like, firstly, I think they're like $10 trillion under management or something, and that 10% of every company in the S&P, something. And then I remember they even did something earlier this year on the board of ExxonMobil. We're not going to.
Indeed.
Yeah,
he did. Yeah. So go ahead. Yeah. What were you going to say?
No, but I was going to, is there any incentive that, like, even the gas and oil, like, have they also kind of leveraged their profits at this point that, like, is there even maybe a false scarcity that the global warming creates, that they can actually make more money off of gas because they're not selling it at a higher volume, but they're selling it at a higher rate?
What's that? What? Yeah, no, indeed, Rob. You look, all your questions are pertinent. What exactly is motivating these people? Fink clearly believes the bullshit. I mean, I think he probably.
Oh, you think no, I think he's evil. I think he understands that he can create regulations that will make investments profitable. So I don't think he believes it. I think I think it's just pure evil.
Well, again, we have to get into the mind and heart of these Hitlers. I've been trying to figure out Hitler for a long time. I love some of the Hitler jokes. I won't even tell the Hitler joke because we're trying to talk seriously about matters. I mean, I was about to say that, of course, the hatred of capitalism is clearly motivating a lot of people because they associate global warming with capitalism. Of course, it's kind of stupid because then the rest of us point out that the Soviet Union, although socialist countries, seem to pollute even worse. So that socialism isn't really the solution, but that won't stop them. They just feel, oh, the capitalists are screwing up the earth, and that motivates them. But you want to talk about Larry Fink, and now you're asking a precise question, which is that do the oil and gas companies see that is a way for them to make more in the way of profits by doing this? Fink is supposedly put. There was a Wall Street Journal article about Fink just this morning that came out. Lawrence Fink of BlackRock. He put something like 3 people on the board at Exxon Mobil. So now that's how they're being influenced. And so you're saying that these 3 people on the board are saying, hey, look, this is a good way to make some profits. And so you're saying they don't care about the 4.3 million people who are dying every year because they can't.
Oh no, yeah, I don't think they care one bit. And if anything, they've got alternative investments. BlackRock does that. If they lose money on their ExxonMobil, it's because they're going to make so much money on windmills or whatever the hell else they've done in nat gas. And I can't fully understand the inner. I'm not that well researched on their investments. I can just see the bigger picture of kind of owning government and pushing for regulation that will make you profitable.
Rob Bernstein wants an answer to every pertinent question that comes up. He wants to know what is motivating these people. Are they evil? Are they stupid? Are they evil and stupid? That's what Rob wants to know, and this is where I come up empty a little bit with Rob.
So here, I'll give you a question with an easy answer, which is, I, like you, think nuclear is going to be a great tool for mankind, and I think we're going to see more usage in the near future. How do I get in on this? I've invested in some URA. I've invested in which, and this one's more wildly speculative, but I've invested in Rolls-Royce because I think that this small nuclear reactors is kind of the wave of the future, but it seems like a lot of it is private at the moment. So I'm curious if you've got the inside scoop on how we can make some money off of nuclear.
Okay, just a moment, Rob. There's the big solution to nuclear, and the word lithium sticks in my mind. The source for nuclear, that it's not yet state of the art, but I do want to say, Rob, that given the political problems with nuclear, I'm a little bit skeptical that it's really the investment of choice right now. I could be wrong because there's so many regulatory burdens imposed on it. And when I mention nuclear, it's only that I take the long vision. And the long vision of centuries ahead is that, well, fossil fuels may run out in 200 years, 300 years, 400 years. It's really probably going to take that long for them to run out because there's still so much more to be tapped. I was just impressed by the numbers recently that we've tapped maybe a small percentage of the fossil fuels.
And we get more efficient in the usage.
More efficient in the usage, but of course, obviously, there's more. Hopefully, the world will use fossil fuels more. Hopefully, the poor people of the world will be using fossil fuels to the extent that the rich people of the world use it. So that's going to accelerate. But what I'm interested in is what would replace fossil fuels 200 years from now, and indeed, nuclear will. Nuclear there's a vast amount of fuel for nuclear energy. It's almost inexhaustible. And what is state of the art right now is that nuclear can basically run everything. It can run battery powered cars. It could be, the basis for battery powered automobiles. And in addition, it can run ships. The ships are run by nuclear. But the only thing at this point that we don't know how to run on nuclear is airplanes. The batteries are too heavy to run, a large Boeing 707. So there would be just a place for fossil fuels with respect to flying, but all the other ways in which we use energy, which are overwhelmingly most of the ways, heating, travel, lighting, all the rest of it can be nuclear based. And so that's the ultimate solution. But I believe, here I bring the next part of my optimism to play. I believe that the punishment that people are suffering now in Europe, will be suffering in Europe in the next few months because of the cold winters. The people who are going to die, the people who are complaining, that there's already a certain backlash. I gather now. I read this recently. Now I'm a little vague on it. That there's the European Union has now declared that maybe gas is the kind of energy they want to use. They're beginning to be horrified by the consequences of their own actions.
Because they specifically did some sort of a reduction in natural gas usage that has really screwed them over, but I don't know the specifics on it.
Well, I'm not sure on the specifics either. I certainly the Biden administration has made a huge difference, cutting back on the development of pipelines that could make the delivery of natural gas and oil cheaper. I don't know the specifics either of what Europe has been doing, but certainly they've been shooting themselves in the foot. They're more beholden to the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union. That dates me, Rob. For most of my life, it was called the Soviet Union, as you probably know. The former Soviet Union, otherwise known as Russia. They're selling natural gas to the Europeans, and I think that again, the Wall Street Journal is pointing out that now we're increasingly dependent on OPEC. You had the great joke that Biden was saying we got to cut back on the use of oil, but please OPEC, please increase the amount of oil in the world. At the same time, you say let's be free of oil, let's be free of fossil fuels, but not yet, because we need more fossil fuels from OPEC. So he's pleading with the Saudis to give us more oil when he's cutting back on oil on the use of oil in our own country. So all of those silly contradictions and the rising price of gasoline at the pump is beginning to hurt. They don't give a damn about those 4.3 million people who are dying every year because they don't have the access to fossil fuels, but they certainly care about their own electorate, both in Europe and in the U.S. And so that's the reason why I'm optimistic that they're already realizing they've got to begin to back off, use all the bullshit at their command to back off about how the use of fossil fuels is a threat to humanity. So I think the Biden administration is beginning to get that message. I think the German government is beginning to get that message as well. So that's why I think there will be a certain ascendancy for fossil fuels, and why I think that the oil companies, ExxonMobil and the rest of them, will be asked to produce more oil, more oil and more gasoline in the future. So I think that's probably the future over the next 10 years, Rob. Nuclear, probably it's a decent investment. I guess it will come back to some extent, but I mentioned nuclear only for the long haul. But again, Rob, you shouldn't listen to me for investment advice, and I'm not completely clear where to put the Rob Bernstein fortune, the Rob Bernstein thousands, where you should allocate your portfolio precisely, Rob. But so you should call your broker for that. But
excellent. All right, so Gene, I want to talk the book, but it's up to you. We're an hour in. If you want to reschedule, do an episode just on the book, we can. I'm comfortable though, and I got no commitment, so I'm happy to dig in now if you are.
Well, my so-called book is a massive enterprise, and so I could certainly do the overview of my so-called book, and which doesn't even have a title. And let me just get into
why not proving the socialists wrong?
Proving the socialists wrong. Yeah. Well, the reason why I regard this part of the interview as vital for all progressives and for all libertarians is that I think that while many people offer advice about advice to libertarians and free marketeers, how do you talk to progressives? I say that the way to talk to progressives is the way I'm about to talk to them in the hour that remains to us. And I think that that the best answer I give when people ask me, why are you a libertarian? I answer, because I care about poor people. That's why I'm a libertarian. That's my first and main answer. I give them a consequentialist response. And people who say, well, because I care about freedom, that when you say that to a progressive, what they really think is, oh, it's freedom from the elite, for the elites, for all you smart people, freedom. Yeah, you're entitled to your freedom, but what about the ways in which the capitalist system shafts people who aren't as smart as you? shafts the broad masses of people. So you're not too sensitive to that, are you? And on top of that, the Ayn Randians don't do us any good by preaching the virtue of selfishness, although I personally do observe that ever since I debated Yaron Brook on the subject at the Seoul Forum, he defended the resolution, selfishness is a virtue. He's taken to use the term self-interest rather than selfish. And of course, I have no problem with the word self-interest. Adam Smith had no problem with the word self-interest. Adam Smith disapproved of selfishness, and we all should disapprove of selfishness. But I mention that only because the Ayn Randians have given us a bad name, because they are implying that we don't care about the broad masses of people. We just want freedom, and for us privileged types, we don't care about the ways in which people have to worry about putting a roof over their head and putting food on the table. And so that's the reason why I think this is important for libertarians to understand.
I love that.
Yeah, thank you.
No, because I end up on the back foot sometimes, because I mean, my starting point was definitely understanding that I thought that this was a better system for everybody, and that it does uplift the poor. But I think you're right. When you start with the freedom, the reason you love freedom is because of that conclusion, or at least for me, that's what I love about freedom, is that it would help everybody. So I think you're right. The better starting point is, wait, how did the way you phrased it? Because you want to help the poor?
Yeah, well, because I care about lifting the living standards of the poor people of the world, of the masses of people, who don't have the high IQs and don't have the enormous talents and skills. The average Joe.
Because we stand for the little man,
for the little guy,
which is why I'm going to play your apartment.
and for the little woman, I stand for the little guy, the little man, and the little woman. All of those people. I believe that gives them the best chance in life to improve their lot in life and to live according to the way they want to live, because of course freedom becomes a part of it as well. That's when I have a long-winded answer. But again, my short answer is, because my long-winded answer as well is that I was raised in the left-wing tradition. My father was a capitalist, but he's more of an FDR liberal. My mother affected me the most. She was, as I famously said, mommy was a commie. She was a card-counting communist, and I came up from intellectual depravity. I was a socialist in my 20s, and so I came from that bleeding heart tradition. I am a bleeding heart capitalist. That's another way I have of putting it. And so to set the stage for this analysis. So again, getting back to my book and all the rest of it, I would like to make my own contribution to that cause through this book, at least a book-length treatment of all of the aspects of bleeding heart capitalism. I mean, maybe the subtitle is "Why Progressives Should Be Libertarians." Why anybody who cares about the plight of poor people should be a libertarian. Should be pro-free market at the very least. And so I want to leave that message to many of my relatives, by the way, because some of my close relatives are still progressives, still left-wing oriented, and still believe that unless you have massive government intervention, then poor people are going to get shafted. I want to begin with the framework. Just take up probably not all of the book, because the book is going to go into many aspects of the issue, which I think another episode of Run Your Mouth would be good. But I want to now set the stage, picking up on a great formulation from the economist George Reisman. And Reisman had a nice rhyme, and I originally heard this in a lecture he delivered before a bunch of progressives. He said that really, if I were to ask you people, why are people earning more than they used to? Why do people earn more than they did a century ago, or more than they did 50 years ago? You'll all tell me, well, it's because of the government, because of government intervention, because capitalists are in the saddle, the employer is in the saddle. And what is the logic of your position as to why employers are in the saddle? It reduces to a nice rhyme that Reisman thought up. Worker need and employer greed. The workers need a job, and the employers are greedy enough to pay them as little as possible. Now, he asserts that worker need and employer greed basically have a lot of truth in them, but they don't explain why wages rise. And it's simple enough to understand that despite worker need and despite employer greed, wages are going to rise in a growing economy. Of course, I stipulate the growing economy, and the growing economy is important to point out because the large fortunes are generally made, 90%, 95% are made by selling great goods and services to the broad masses of people. That's where the real money lies. That's how Sam Walton became a millionaire, and that's how Jeff Bezos became a millionaire. You don't become. A few people can become quite rich by selling only to the rich, but basically you want to sell. That's how Henry Ford became a billionaire. And Rockefeller. That's how you do it. And those goods and services are bestowed on the broad masses of people, but then they hold their own with respect to salaries. So let's get to worker need and employer greed, and work through why those two facts still.
And what you're saying is that you have to you have to create something of value, and it's got to be of value to the poor of the world or the middle class of the world in order to become wealthy. So you're being rewarded for doing something that's of benefit, not just to rich people.
Well, because the facts are that because of the way wages are distributed, I should then bring in the statistics I've used against socialists, which is that 80% of all consumer spending in the U.S. is accounted for by the lower 90%. 1/3 of it is counted by the lower half. So the lower 90% are really, we workers, we proletariats. The other 10%, let's say, are the employers and the capitalists, even though 10% is a lot.
And that means we got a lot of voting dollar power. Like when you and I argue that, like, let people kind of vote with their dollars as opposed to kind of government policies, people can pick what they want and go vote with their dollars. Yeah. So the poor of the world, or not the rich, controls 90% of consumer spending. So they should actually have an outsized voice in a world where you get to vote with your dollar.
Right. No, it's a correct. 90% account for 80%. They account for 80% of all consumers, the 90%. So obviously that means that those goddamn 10%, they have 20%. So that's we hate that. We egalitarians. I don't personally mind that the 10% account for 20% and the 90% account for 80%. But the point is that while you can make a fair amount of money, like Bloomberg, you can make a fair amount of money by selling things to that top 10%. The real money. The reason why Bezos is the richest man in the world is because he thought of everybody, the bottom 90% that account for 80% of all consumer spending. Because Steve Jobs was selling those smartphones to Maasai warriors. Because even the poor people of the country own smartphones. That's where the real money is. But so that's why the income of the broad masses of people rises over time, because the Rockefellers and the Fords and the Sam Waltons and the Bezos of this world understand that you've got to create value for them if you really want to become a tycoon in this world. But I want to get to worker need and employer greed, because the worker need and employer greed are the compelling arguments that the progressives will use, even though it doesn't quite occur to them to talk precisely in their way. But this is an argument that appeals to them. Workers need a job. Most workers need to work in order to live and must find work quickly because their savings can't sustain them for very long. So that's valid. That's been valid as a practical matter for most people. Let's grant it. Well, we can argue with it a little bit. We can modify it a little bit, but it's mostly true. You do need a job most of the time. You can't last that much longer without a job if you don't have a job in a free market society. And then self-interest, employer greed. Just like we consumers want to pay as little as possible for what we buy, We love bargains. There's employer greed. Nobody is saying that employers are not greedy in the sense that they want to maximize their profits and they would like to be able to pay you as little as possible. And therefore, if we put worker need and employer greed together, then don't we find, as progressives will conclude, that workers are only going to get paid subsistence. Why would they get paid subsistence? And that's the Marxian argument. They get paid subsistence because if they won't even pay you enough to keep life and body together, then you'd rather just die under a tree than actually go to work. So clearly they've got to pay you subsistence in order to keep you alive. And that was the Karl Marx's argument. I went to graduate school. We were studying Marx, and we assumed, well, the capitalists are in the saddle, and the capitalists pay people just subsistence. And why should they pay any more? Because workers need a job, and the employers are greedy. And so that's the logic of the argument, and it would seem to be compelling. Now, what's wrong with that argument is best illustrated by a hypothetical that Riesman throws out. He thought of this one. Let's say you're moving to New York City from an area where you needed a car. That's, you lived in a rural area and you needed a car, but you're going to live in the middle of Manhattan and it's too expensive to maintain a car in Manhattan. You don't have the money to do so. Can't garage it. So you need to get rid of the car because you're moving to Manhattan. So you have a need. You have a need to get rid of that car because otherwise it could bankrupt you because, you'd give it away. You get somebody to take it off your hands because it's now a liability to you because you're moving to New York City. And so you have a need to get rid of a car. You're at the mercy of those people who want to buy a car. And now there's consumer greed. The people who will buy a car from you are greedy on the other side. They want to pay as little as possible for that car. Now, do you have to give the car away? Do you? No, you don't. No. Do you
It's a
have
great example.
to? Yeah. It's a good example because clearly, no, you'll find that there's a whole range of competitive bids for the kind of car you want to sell to people. Similarly, in the case of employment, because labor is a non-specific good, non-specific being, that labor is adaptable to a lot of different things. And by the way, an interesting angle that I like about labor being a non-specific good, we could all work at McDonald's, we could all pump gas at a filling station. There's so many different things that we can do. But here's the interesting part of it, which is that the more you enhance your skills, the more narrow the number of employers you could possibly choose from. If you only want to be an economic journalist, which is what I was in the business of doing, then there were only a relatively limited number of people I could work for. But if you want to generalize your skills, then there are hundreds of potential employers who are bidding for your labor. And so obviously, just as you don't have to give the car away or sell it for $10 simply because you have the need to get rid of it, and simply because the consumers are greedy, you don't have to work for subsistence because you have employers out there. Now, what is really motivating the employers to bid for your services? What's motivating them is their evaluation of the degree of profit they can make from your labor. And so we in an advanced and progressing economy, by the way, I don't even a lot of the textbooks use the word productivity, and while productivity is not an irrelevant concept, I would prefer to just talk about their greediness, the issue of profit, which is that they evaluate that they have certain jobs that they need to fill in order to earn a profit in the businesses that they pursue, and that they're profit oriented. And then they interview you, they evaluate you, they look at your background, and they come to a judgment, implicit or explicit, as to how much they can make by employing you. Are you okay? You're
I think my camera might have just froze. Can you hear me though?
I can hear you, so it doesn't really matter. But I don't like the way you look, Rob. Okay, it doesn't matter. I'll just look at myself.
No, give it a second. It'll come back.
Okay.
But
Well,
you can keep talking while
I can keep
while I
blabbing away,
fix it.
Rob. I'm going to keep blabbing away at you. The point, I just appreciate the way you're responding to the way I'm talking, Rob. But anyway, that and now you look blasé. You look like you're about to fall asleep in a frozen moment. But anyway, I will continue, Rob. They are looking to evaluate the value that you can create for them and whether they can earn a surplus from your work. But the point is that if they all have, let's say, and these numbers are actually reasonably realistic, they all say, they might all think that that they want to pay you 80 cents on the dollar of revenue. In other words, for every 80 cents that they pay you, they want to make $1 of revenue. And so they have to ask themselves, will they be able to make 80 cents on the dollar by employing you and then sell the product of your labor, be it your contribution to the goods that they sell or the services that they sell? Will they be able to sell it for $1? And then if they can employ you in that way, they will do so. They'll offer you that job. But now let's say that some employer is paying you just 60 cents on the dollar rather than 80 cents on the dollar. Well, other employers will come in and bid up your wage. They will see the potential to earn that 20 cents of margin and bid up your wage, so that therefore there will be in a competitive marketplace a certain pressure to bid up the wage to the extent that you shop around. Getting back to the car that you're going to sell, you're going to look at all the competitive bids for your car. Similarly, you're going to look at all the competitive bids for your labor, and you're going to go to the best job offered. Working conditions also apply. The 80 cents, by the way, of salary also has to do with the cost of employing you. And in a progressive economy, then that 20% margin is going to mean that that you're going to get richer and richer because goods and services are going to be sold to you at that higher wage. Rob, you want to step in because it's a little disconcerting to see that image of you having gone frozen. Are you still there?
I'm still here. I'm listening intently, and I'm hoping that the camera will come back shortly.
Well, that's okay. Okay, but I don't know if I've made my arithmetic clear to you. What I'm basically saying is that the profit margin is the issue, and if you are asking for a wage of 85 cents. And most employers want to get that 20 cents of margin out of you, then you won't get employed. You have to go down to 80 cents. But if some employers are underbidding for your work, if they are underpaying you, then you'll migrate to in the competitive marketplace to somebody who will pay better.
You're saying you kind of command the value that you represent. If you're making your firm a substantial amount of money,
Yeah.
And you have the knowledge of the fact that you're able to do that, and there aren't a substantial amount of people that could easily replicate what you're doing, then you could easily go to another employer and demand more money because you make the employer money.
Yes, that's right. And the employer will bid your services away. And
if you've got a very simple skill,
yeah.
and so the firm actually is creating more of the value that they're able to take, let's just say you using a hammer and nail or something very simple. Like you're able to stand in one spot all day and press a button, and the firm knows how to make you profitable by standing there and pressing a button. Well, then they command a little bit more of the value there. You're not going to be paid as well. And because where are you going to go press a button and get paid, $15 an hour to do so? Maybe another firm that knows how to organize people standing there to press a button.
Yes. Okay. Well, right. You're talking about pressing a button, flipping a burger. Probably the button can be pressed by a machine, but we do know that in the U.S. economy, empirically, more and more people are employed all the time. So there are always jobs for people, but you're focusing that. Right?
No, there's an idea. I think I just read this yesterday in Riesman's book. I'm reading his big book, and
yeah.
I like this idea a lot. I just thought it was so interesting. Is that you like under a capitalist system, skilled laborers don't compete with unskilled laborers. So if you're a person and you're really smart, and so you decide, hey, I don't want to go work at McDonald's, or I don't want to be a mechanic, I'm going to become an economist. Well, that
Yeah.
also benefits the guy who wants to go work at McDonald's, because now you don't have to go compete with the economist guy for that job. Because in a world where, the economist guy is not going to make any more money, he might go, hey, why am I going to go to school? Why am I going to learn this stuff? I'll just go flip the burgers. So now the other burger flipper is going to also make even less money because, or I guess in the socialist system, there's not less money, but they now have to compete, with people that would have done other roles to even, I guess, find a job flipping burgers.
Yes, exactly. And the burger flipper, if he can produce $12 an hour of value, but if the minimum wage is at $15, then he's not going to get a job. But what also happens is that if there are a lot of people who can be employed at a low wage, then there will be entrepreneurs who will actually come in and employ them and see a way to earn a profit from their labor. The only point I guess we need to emphasize now is that the worker need employer greed, part of it, just as it doesn't say that you've got to give away that car when you move to the city. It's that when you move to any area where there are a number of different employers who could employ your labor, and this is again applies especially to the unskilled and to the semi-skilled, because that's where most of the jobs are and where most of the employers are, then you can shop around and find an employer who can employ you at a wage that will be profitable to the employer. The employer will offer you a wage that's profitable to him, and you will go to the employer who pays you more, and that employer will pay you more if somebody is underpaying you. You will also learn on the job. There's another factor to that. The employer has to bear in mind that he might lose you after a year. There's all kinds of calculations.
Isn't just the current market absolute proof against the original? I think the original idea that you said was that in a pure market society, according to Marx, you will only get paid what you need to survive because the owners are greedy. But we have a current system where most people, at least in free markets like the United States of America, are not just being paid. You got plenty of people who are making a lot more than just the minimum. So isn't that just absolute proof that the idea is false?
Oh yes. Well, no, just a moment. Okay, now you bring up the empirical point, which is important to bear in mind. If you ask for a show of hands among progressives, and you ask them why are wages higher, well, they would say, well, unions have helped, labor unions have helped, the minimum wage laws have helped. There were other legal interventions, and probably, very possibly, capitalists are nicer now than they used to be. They used to be absolute bastards in the 19th
So they're saying we're not looking at a perfect world model, because if there wasn't government intervention on behalf of workers, then you would have ended up in an environment where workers are not paid any more than what they absolutely need to survive.
Yes. Now,
I got it. Interesting. Okay.
This moment. Now, the key empirical answer to that is to take the period from 1870 to about 1925, 1928, 29, before the Great Depression happened. But it's about 1870. It's nearly a 60-year period in the U.S. history. And why do I take that particular period? First of all, because we have reasonably good data on wages, on living standards, and we also know about that period prior to the advent of the New Deal, that 60-year period, that while there was government intervention of different kinds in the labor market over that 60-year period, starting in 1870, we know that there was virtually no government intervention in the labor markets. There was no minimum wage. Unions were a relatively tiny percentage of the labor force. They didn't become important until New Deal legislation gave them legal rights that enabled unionization to take off.
And isn't the period you're describing one of the greatest wealth expansions ever?
Exactly. And we don't even have, and then the point I make to progressives is, would you please account for how this occurred over this 60-year period in the U.S.? There were no protections for labor in the U.S. And on top of everything else, through most of that period, we had massive immigration into the country. My ancestors, the Irish, others, pursuing unskilled work, millions of immigrants begging for work and flooding into the country and hurting the wage, bidding down the wage because of the huge extra supply of laborers. And yet, we don't even have to belabor the labor side of it and look at wages, even though there is data on that. All we have to do is look at living standards by the broad masses of people by the 1920s versus the 1870s, and recognize this could only have come about because real wages were higher, because there was no welfare then either. Nothing happened. It was the bad old days of capitalism, and that's when, arguably, the working classes, the broad masses of people, improved their lot in life even more rapidly. And of course, the confusion that enters into the mind of many progressives is that obviously living standards were much lower in the 1920s. Much lower in 1910, but hopefully we can focus them on the progress that was made, on the fact that people were better fed, electricity was introduced in terms of living standards. People were able to drive cars. In the 20s, the average person could afford a Model T car. Not the poor people, but certainly working class, middle class people could afford cars. Could live much better in almost every conceivable way, only because their wages must have been higher in real terms. And then the interesting part of it is that the nominal wage was not necessarily higher in real terms. The real wage was. And of course, in a progressing economy, for the most part, what we would actually have is stable wages in nominal terms, but then we get the Henry Fords and the Rockefellers to introduce cheap fuel, cheap cars, cheap everything else that bestows on the broad masses of people a much higher living standard while their wage remains approximately stable. And so that's the answer to the progressives. Look at that particular period of time and then explain to me how it all happened. The bad old days of American capitalism, when for some strange reason, even though the labor markets were being flooded by immigrants, everybody raised their living standards. And even though unions were a tiny percentage of the labor force. So that's hopefully the ultimate empirical point to make to the progressives about how free market capitalism actually does work in terms of lifting the living standards of the broad masses of people. Are you still there, Rob?
I'm still here, and sadly, this is why I need a full-time producer to sit here, because when the tech issues come, I don't know what the hell to do.
Okay. Well,
but I'm still here. I'm listening.
I guess we can still talk. We're sort of a half hour in. I wanted to introduce that general point. I guess we can then deal with all the other aspects in which government makes matters worse rather than better. But I don't know if we sufficiently set the stage for the point that the exploitation theory is not valid. I guess I could bring in another aspect of it that Riesman likes to point out, which is that employer greed, to put a finer point on the issue, actually means that they bid up the wage. That in order to get a sufficient number of people to work for him, Henry Ford advertised the $5 day at that point. He wanted people
or if you want a specific worker. So in other words, yeah, right. So the greed itself might actually get you to pay more because you want specific people or you want more of them.
Yes. But then I like to mention the Henry Ford point, because this was sort of ordinary labor. He wanted people to move to Detroit. He needed thousands of workers, and he advertised a huge increase in wages because he needed the people to come. He needed to attract workers to his massive factories, and that's because he felt, because of what he had developed in terms of mass production, he knew that if he could employ people at the $5 a day, he could make a profit from their labor, and profits then are what motivate the employers to bid up their wage, bid up the wage of people of limited skills. and profits are what motivate entrepreneurs to sell goods and services to the broad masses of people that make them prosperous. And so hopefully that's the basic argument why the dynamics of free market capitalism will principally benefit the broad masses of people. I guess the other part of it to point out is that in terms of equality, if you really look at not so much the actual dollar numbers, but if you look at what Bill Gates, what the very rich consume, and what the broad masses of people consume in this U.S. economy, then you find that probably inequality is narrowed. Because so many of the things, of course, to cast ourselves centuries back, so many of the things that rich people had, the rich people of the world had, the poor people didn't have. But now, the broad masses of people can afford air conditioning, and they can afford cars, they can afford smartphones. As it's pointed out, the Maasai warrior owns same smartphone that Bill Gates has. And so there's not a whole lot to envy in the way the rich people live in terms of the way the rest of us live. I mean, maybe, ultimately about the only thing to envy about those rich people is that they've got their own private jets. But that's a government problem. The reason why we've got to stand on line at those goddamn airports is because of the crazy government rules. And that's why flying is such an inconvenience, and why the rich people can just get in their private planes and fly around. But actually, in terms of goods and services,
that's such a good point that flying probably would not be that big of a deal if it wasn't for, like, I don't even know what other licensing laws exist that, like, you end up just on, like, the tarmac, like, everything that's annoying about it. You're 100% right that if it was just a free market, you could probably just show up to an airport, walk onto a plane, have a cocktail, not be crammed in, and just be fine.
Exactly, and as I say, then the only thing I find that I envy about the very rich is that they have their private planes, and that too is a government problem. But otherwise, there's nothing much.
So just I'm gonna do the Rob Bernstein thing. I'm gonna give the short on this because it's fascinating.
Yes,
the capitalism, it's working. Because in order to make substantial money, in order to get really rich, you got to create something of value that's going to be of value for the common man. And then that also creates, not only does that mean that you're giving them something, but then also the jobs that are created, right? All the jobs that are created, it's not true that you can just pay people like the lowest possible wage for them to survive. And the proof of that is that absent of government intervention, when we had the greatest wealth expansion ever, your wealthy people that were offering jobs were not doing that. Like, people were wages did get bid up.
Well, yeah, no, wait. Well, I'm sorry. You're talking about my period from like 1870 to about 1930. That's 60 years.
Right. And then on top of all that, as economies grow, technology gets better, and then goods and services actually become cheaper. So the standard of living of the poor actually increases. Because
all those goods and services, all the Henry Fords and the Johnny Rockefellers and the Andrew Carnegies, those so-called robber barons can only make money by selling to the masses. And then actually, in numerical terms, what really happens is that nominal wages either remain stable or maybe even fall. But the goods that are bestowed, but the real wage increases because the goods that are bestowed on them, that were bestowed on them during that 60-year period, increase exponentially. And again, I guess where I want to put a fine point on things is to recognize that in a competitive marketplace where capitalists are underpaying, so to speak, maybe they're making a 30% profit margin off people's labor. But if you can make a fortune through a 20% profit margin, then you can bid away that labor, drive that guy into bankruptcy because nobody's going to work for him, and you can make a profit. So that there's a natural motivation on the part of the greedy employer to bid up the wage in order to get the best people they possibly can to work for them, in order to take advantage of people who underpay in terms of the wage. Yeah,
and that's kind of just a function of the opportunity cost.
opportunity. How do you mean? Explain. What do you mean?
No, because in other words, like if there's an industry where some guy has figured out how he can make a 30% profit margin
Yeah.
on the labor, then some other guy will just look at it and go, "Oh, I can make more money doing that than what I'm doing," and then you're gonna end up having to hire people at lower profit margins. So like there's no unless I don't know, you got some technology that no one else has at the moment. You're not going to figure out some industry where you're not having to pay people the value of their labor.
Well, the value of their labor in terms of your evaluation of what it costs to employ those people and what you can sell your product for. But I mean, I know what you've alluded to, Rob. I want to mention. You seem to talk about somebody who's invented, who maybe have some kind of special niche, special thing that he sells. In order to get people to work for him to produce that item or to produce that service, he's got to bid away labor from all the other employers. Yeah.
No, I'm saying like let's say you're Ford. You're the first guy who invents the car, right?
Well,
you're the first.
Well, that's a hypothetical. Probably wasn't.
Let's just say so, or you invent. Let's just say let's keep it simple. He invents the car. No one else has a car. Every other factory is paying $5 an hour for labor, and he goes, "Look, this is amazing. I got this invention here. I can pay everyone $5 an hour on labor, and my finished product is something that no one else can offer. So I'm actually going to make $30 an hour profit off labor. It's unheard of." But someone's going to look at that and they're going to go start making cars. They're going to go, "Look, there's another rich guy who can afford to put in the capital to create a car factory would go, oh, why do I have a factory over here making wrenches where I'm paying my labor $5 an hour and my profit margin on them is only $5 an hour? I'm going to go make a competing car factory." So that's what I'm saying, that like if you figured out a way to profit off of labor and that like it doesn't exist in the marketplace, someone's probably going to come in and compete with you, and they're going to drive down that profit margin.
Drive down that profit margin, but again,
but then on the same note, meaning that like the wages will in some way be returned to the labor. It's not like indefinitely you can figure out a way to suck value out of like. You know what I mean? It's like if at some point, if you figured out how to organize simple tasks in a way to create an extreme amount of profit, someone's probably going to come in and compete, and they're going to end up either hiring people that didn't have jobs, which is a win because now you got a new industry, or they're going to have to drive up the price of labor because they're going to have to pay people more to try and poach your workers. So
well, that's right. Yeah. Well, okay. You formulated well. I just want to put a fine point on what you just said. You're basically saying, Rob, which is the other phenomenon of the free market, is that entrepreneurs are constantly looking for temporary monopoly. They're constantly looking for something special, which will give them an unusual return of profit. And but those profits are eventually susceptible. They'll eventually get narrowed by other entrepreneurs who will realize that if they just copycat on what you've been doing, then they can get rich through a 20% profit margin, whereas you had a 30%. And so there will be a strong tendency for entrepreneurial profits to eventually be melted away, even though while you're enjoying that entrepreneurial profit, you're going to get pretty rich. So that's a constant churn in the marketplace. I believe that's what you've said, Rob. And so that will result in your bidding up the labor. But of course, what also happens, by the way, just to put a finer point on it, is that if you're in a situation where you're paying labor a certain amount and you're making a certain huge profit margin, you are going to be aware of the potential for entry, the potential for competition that will move it. You then become a moving target, and so you will probably reduce your price or raise your wage in order to become less vulnerable.
Make it more expensive to compete with you, right?
Yeah, make it more difficult. So if you cut your price, then of course that price that you cut benefits laborers because what they're buying from your company now is cheaper, and that's often the way in which.
But it also cuts down the profit.
Cuts down the profit, but then of course it cuts down the profit, but then the profit is hopefully sufficient for you anyway. And of course, the reason why you have to cut down your profit is because if you don't, then you're going to attract competition that could drive you to the wall. So therefore, oddly enough, it isn't even quite as simple as saying that you establish a 30% profit and then somebody comes in and takes it away from you. You may well guard yourself against that by maintaining a narrow enough profit margin to keep out the temptation on the part of others to compete with you. And
But
of course,
the point, I think the short point is the free market kind of polices your ability
yeah.
to, like, let's just say wrongfully profit off the labor of others. At the end of the day, it will get returned to laborers. There's no ability to just figure out a way to make some incredible profit off of laborers where it's not indefinite. So you're either going to have to reduce the cost of your goods or you're going to be vulnerable to competition. So the problem posed by the Marxists is self-policing. The free market handles it.
Yes. Well, you say illegal. See, actually, might as well use the word exploitation. That while we want to go back on that point about exploitation, there is no real exploitation except if you want to put it, say, quote unquote exploitation. Then, just as you say, if you want to quote unquote exploit workers by making a huge profit off their labor, you're going to be vulnerable to competition. Other people are going to bid up the labor. Other people will charge less for the product, and you will probably become aware in the first instance of that competition, and so you won't even invite it. But if you do invite it, then that so-called quote-unquote exploitation is not going to last for very long.
Now,
because you're going to be attracting competition.
I do have one question. So if you look at the global labor, so at some point it is somewhat a function of supply, right? I mean, everything's kind of a function of supply and demand, but if there's such an abundance of supply currently of untapped labor, like let's say you go to China or you go to India or other locations, so then obviously economies can expand to a point where, yes, companies do need to start bidding for labor, and then everything that we're describing would take place. But on the bottom floor, right, if you walk into an environment where there is an abundance of, where there's, people who are looking for jobs, they don't really have any leverage. So aren't you going to have some of the Marxist problem, at the origination? Like, in other words, as societies develop and become wealthier, so yes, you will advance to a point where I think there's not enough labor for every job, where people become more skilled, and so they're able to command better wages. But if you step into an environment, that people don't currently have jobs and there's an abundance of labor, so you are going to, I mean, I wouldn't call it exploitation because these people otherwise wouldn't have jobs. And if they're free to work there, it might be their best option. But I guess everything that we're saying kind of seems to exist in an advanced society, like in the US, because there isn't just an abundance of labor, but when there's just a total abundance of labor, wouldn't you have a degree of exploitation and not everything we're describing kind of kicking in?
Well, okay, just a moment. Let me try to focus on the broad brushstroke of what you just said, Rob. I guess you're sort of referring to the fact that an awful lot of cheap labor in China and cheap labor in the poor countries of the world has been employed to service the production of goods that are in turn being sold at Walmart. Is that what you're more or less referring to?
No, I'm saying if the concern is, hey, I can open up a factory and I can pay laborers virtually nothing more than what they need just to sustain themselves, right? I guess that's the concern of the Marxists.
Well, okay. Well, all right. I guess the first thing to say about that is that it's not so much an advanced economy or a poor economy. It's just that in a malfunctioning economy, there could be a lot of people who don't have jobs. Is that what you're saying? I mean,
yeah, I guess if you're in an environment, all right, so that's interesting.
Okay.
So you're saying that the only way that there could be an environment where there's an abundance of people without jobs is that there's some sort of a problem within the economy.
Yeah, and then in a poor economy, you can't just wish everybody to be richer by hiking the minimum wage to $20 an hour. You'll just render a lot of people unemployed. I guess to some degree, Rob, you're anticipating my one of the longest parts of my book and the lectures, which is that on balance, government makes matters much worse, makes it much harder for the free market to function in terms of its real results of raising the living standards of the broad masses of people by giving
Just saying
them.
the natural course of the free
But,
market is that it will raise the living
yeah,
standards.
but
And
good, yes.
no. And that, and so I guess part B is understanding. Well, part A is proving, listen, the free market will raise living standards. And
Because of
then
yeah, yes.
because that's the natural course of the free market.
Try to outline in broad brushstrokes why it happens and how it did happen empirically from 1870 to 1930. Yes, go ahead.
And then part B is, here's the unintended consequences of when you interrupt that you're
Yeah.
actually getting in the way of the natural progression of uplifting people's wages and living standards.
But if you took but I want to put but if you're going back to this point about how if we have a situation in which a lot of people don't have jobs, then hopefully, Rob, giving them a job even at subsistence is a good thing. And I thought I would pounce and say, why do you think, as Ben Powell, who's written about the sweatshops of India, has pointed out, the sweatshops of Bangladesh, why do you think people gravitate to that employment?
Because it's their best opportunity.
Because it's the best opportunity available to them.
Right.
And of course, famously, Paul Krugman, who's basically polluted our intellectual atmosphere for many years, had his finest moment in the 1990s when he wrote an essay, a short essay called, "Sweatshop Jobs at Sweatshop Wages in Third World Countries Are a Lot Better Than No Jobs at All." That's not an edifying sight. Obviously, it's sort of a throwback to the poverty of the 1870s, when you and I could be appalled at the conditions of life, that the working conditions that people, including children, were subject to. But then, of course, we don't even bear in mind that it was a heck of a lot worse when they did subsistence farming in 1860, when that they were dealt the hand that they had to deal with. Similarly, in these poor countries, it's a heck of a lot better than to be a subsistence farmer, to work for one of these multinational corporations that gives you a decent job. And when most of them are asked, do you want better working conditions or do you want a higher take-home pay? Because you understand that the other point that Friedman makes is that it's the full cost of employing a worker that has to do with whether you'll employ that person, and so that cost could be spent in terms of a wage that the worker takes home with him in terms of the actual dollars paid or whatever currency you're paying in, versus providing air conditioning on a hot day for that worker, which also costs in terms of employing that worker. And overwhelmingly in those very poor countries, the workers actually say, I'd rather work long hours and have the money spent by giving me more take-home pay than spent on better working conditions. I'd rather sweat the day through and be able to take home more money for my family. So again, it doesn't help to not offer those workers pay. What induces the multinationals go there. They have a reasonable profit margin, but really they make a higher rate of profit by going to third world countries than they make by employing people in this country. But it's not overwhelming. It's not enriching them to the point where it's insanely large. They still have to compete for labor, and they survive by charging very little for the goods that they sell, and basically, by the way, it's a win-win situation. What's happened? The third world, the workers in these poor countries, in India and elsewhere in China as well, and Bangladesh, benefit by earning a much higher wage than they possibly can in their home country, and then those goods are sort of basically sold to the working class people who frequent Walmart. That's the reason why, by the way, goods, the price of goods over the last 10, 20 years has really been relatively flat, even though it's recently increased because of the inflationary pressures of the Federal Reserve. But I don't know if I've dealt with that sufficiently. You're just talking about any situation in which you have a lot of unemployed people, and you're right to say that, so to speak, if there's an abundance on the supply side, then capitalists will take advantage of it. But basically, that's, I would argue, just what the doctor ordered, so to speak. The economic doctor ordered
because they'll
those
step in
people
and create jobs.
will
And
be
so that's
giving
the
jobs.
starting point. Now we're initiating this process that will
Yeah.
start lifting up people's standards of living.
Yeah, but I mean, if you want to bring, I mean, but then of course we want to ask ourselves, why is it that you have in this country? Why do we have recessions? Why do we have surplus labor? Then we can begin to explain it not through the workings of the marketplace, but through the operation of capitalism. We can also again point out the harm that the minimum wage laws do, the harm that unions do.
I think. Gene, why don't we do a part 2 on the consequences of government intervention, and then we can do a full hour detailing, I guess, part B of the book, which is here's all the ways that government's getting in the way of the free market being able to uplift people.
Well, thank you, Rob. Absolutely. Yeah, we've gone on. It's now been an hour and 50 minutes.
And we covered, we covered global warming. We covered a lot. This is dense.
Yes, it was. I was arguing, Rob. I remember when I said this could be the most important episode for your viewers in the entire, for all podcast listeners, for the entire 2022. It's not because I'm that special, Rob. It's only that I've got a special message, which you and I stand on the shoulders of giants, of people like George Reisman, on other free market thinkers who've given us these insights that you and I can impart to people. That. To sew it up with respect to the message of bleeding heart capitalism, that really, in a way, ultimately, the reason to be a libertarian and to be pro free market is because you care about the lifting the living standards of the broad masses of people, and freedom that the free market gives you also matters. But otherwise, I think that we're leading with our chins when we speak about freedom, because you immediately get this sort of like inchoate reaction that all you care about is elites. And what we've articulated in terms of worker need and employer greed is that we've drawn out, through the help of George Reisman, this sort of inarticulate suspicion that the progressives have of the way the capitalist system works. They think the capitalist is in the saddle. They don't realize that in a competitive marketplace, really, ultimately, the working people are in the saddle.
All right, Gene, I absolutely love it. We will have to get on an email. We'll schedule part 2 where we start getting into the consequences, but really appreciate the time, and thank you.
Sure. Bye-bye, Ron.
All right. Later, Gene.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.